coaching for performance, we've talked about that. Now you can actually use one of the tools that we have called a Leadership 360 that really you can see how, your leader is saying, yes, I've done all these things, I'm a great leader, and I have no other room to grow. And, we probably know that it's constant because you'll have a new team or they'll be in new situations or growing in their career. But guiding in this leadership development path can be a great enlightening experience for the individual going through it, but for you as a coach as well. But the challenges in leadership development is holding the team accountable for performance. We've talked a lot about that. Somebody that's a little more cooperative doesn't necessarily like having all that control over them. So you've learned a lot about the dynamics of that. We do emphasize transparency in the business is important. We know that leaders take responsibility for the team performance. Keeping clear communication is important. One of the things that I'm a big believer of, it doesn't matter the perfect plan, always there's going to be things that come in that can derail. Okay. That can derail. The best laid out plan can be derailed. And it never fails that you will have situations where you have the perfect team member, they decide they're going to leave the company. So that puts a big hole in the organization. How do you respond to that? Or there's somebody that has, a family issue and they sort of need to take a family leave. I mean, there's lots of things that come in that you can really help them in that organization get back to that performance of that team. One of the big things I believe in is authentic leadership. If you're actually walking the talk, the people that work with you will always trust that the intentions. And one thing that our partner Lee Ellis teaches in his Leadership Freedom Program, because he writes a lot about millennial employees, and there's this perception that they are lazy, they don't want to work. And that, there's probably some social aspects of that, but truly millennials want to feel like the work that they're working on is important, and that if you say, this is where we need to go, and you're not acting authentically, that's a real turnoff for them because they really do feel like they've got options to leave and do other things. I mean, would you agree with that, Caitlin? So it's a really interesting phenomenon. You get the baby boomers and the Gen X that sort of are leaders, and you do see that where they and Lee writes a lot about this or talks about it, that it's a being authentic. They want that authenticity, but they need to be put in leadership positions because, quite honestly, leadership isn't something that you're born with. It is developed. So you can really help develop some great leaders. And then knowing how to identify sort of the right talents for the team. We've talked a lot about that. 8, succession planning. The CEO that's out there believes that, hey, I'm resilient and I can do these things. Having a succession plan is really important because if this business is built on sort of a process and it's really solid and something happens that person needs to leave the business for whatever reason, you got to have a succession plan. There's got to be one because companies that do business with you want to make sure that if they're doing business with you, they're in it for the long term. And then what's the leadership legacy for that CEO or that individual or the C-suite? Lots of great things to think about. And we do know, we've talked a lot about the relationships and results. Just think about the seesaw. Some of us are a little bit more on the results side, some of us more relational. I'm a big believer you can make it balance. Just by putting the right people in the right roles, having sensitivity, being authentic, and you can really help them discover a lot of that and keep that in balance. And you can see when we run the team report, if you have a team of, if you have a team that's an initiator team or a strategist team, you may need to balance it out with a little bit more of the relational side. Vice versa. A lot of nonprofits, we see this often, that almost everybody in the team are community builder types. And they can't necessarily deliver on the finance side or the goals, because they're all being very community focused, but they're not thinking about the organization, writing grants, things like that. So it's just important when you're working with organizations, whether they're profit or nonprofit, you want to have the blend of leadership in both results and relationships. This is one that I think Lee introduced us to, isn't it? It's one of the great ones, leadership engagement model. Withdraw, engage, and dominate. So these things, the framework for engaging your leadership approach, but these things, withdrawing, probably not the best for any leader to do. You don't really want them to withdraw because you want them to be present, you want them to be involved, but sometimes when people are under stress and they just don't want to address something or they come too forceful, these are things that can happen. Same thing with the dominant. We've talked about that. Stress behaviors that create sort of control, because I need to control the goal, dictate, force. It can appear to some people to be bullying. It's important that you're really here in this engage. Not always easy to do, but this is where you're going to have more success with your team.
Yeah, just to pick up on what Leon said there, is what a lot of leaders tend to do in the first instance is to withdraw. Particularly the more reserved leader will withdraw. So I know that might happen to me, and so I'll retreat, hide, abandon, be thinking about it somewhere, and then when I want to step out and deal with it, it becomes a dominate type situation, which is also unhealthy. Whereas the more that you can learn to engage all the time and not let things build up is really the place that you want to be. So you want to keep yourself in the middle, or if you've got a coach or you are the coach, is to keep that leader in that middle area as much as they can, and not escape to withdrawing and then dominating.
And what I've seen is that withdraw and dominate are typically stress responses, and a lot of times that's the first reaction that a leader will have to a new stimulus that they weren't expecting, a surprise, a stressful event. You can have those the more awareness you have that withdraw is my first place to go and then angry is my second place to go, the sooner you can get to your third place where you have a dialogue or you move. Part of the energy leadership work that I've done, basically those are your stress behaviors and they drain energy, and it's really difficult to get something positive out of those two states, either withdrawn or dominating. And it is sort of natural sometimes for a stress event to trigger one of those behaviors, but the more you're aware of it and can make a choice, you can move yourself out of those things and sort of up the ladder into that middle section there. So as being a leader, when you see one of these two behaviors from somebody that doesn't typically exhibit these behaviors, you can help coach them by sort of recognizing that that's some sort of stress response and trying to get to the root of what is the stress response that they're having right now, and how can you as a leader support them out of that stress response and into something that's a little bit more positive.
The trend for leaders now, they're saying, is to be more of a coach. That millennials don't want a boss, they want a coach. So that's interesting to be able to coach the leaders into becoming more of a coach in that role.
Yeah, we all are. We sort of mentor everybody, right? But it might seem in the old world of a little bit more of the boss, and but that's still important to have the hierarchy. So we know, as Nikki pointed out, that tree example was great. What decisions really do need to be at the root level, because you don't want that to be sort of a problem, but you really do want to come from a place where people know that their career is important, they're able to grow, and you do these from this place. This probably looks familiar, the pillars. So leader review, we've talked a lot about that, healthy teams. The leadership assessment, which is the 360, which we will get into a little bit more detail. Talked a lot about team review over the last 2 days. Team relationships, you could be the boss, but you have to really let these relationships nurture. You have tools in the toolbox to be able to help remediate anything that may be going off kilter. Use those comparison reports. Use it in business planning, as part of what, do you have sort of the right culture? Because this is really where all of this is really leading to culture. Is this the kind of culture that you're really trying to develop and build? Because it doesn't just take one person. And then the leader coaching. Any questions on any of those? And there is a workbook as part of the 360. You know, really identify if somebody is a leader, they're going into a leadership role, identify those leadership behaviors. There's a term here that you'll hear, it's called Sustainable Performance Index. It's actually a score. So when somebody completes the 360 process, it will give you as the coach sort of the information, because the way that the 360 works in our system is everybody completes it. You as the coach can determine we're ready to lock it down. We run the leadership 360. You have access to the report to see, and then you actually share it with your client, because you really don't want that report just sent off to them, because there are comments that some of the employees or the leader have given. Hopefully they're all constructive, but sometimes people think it's a way to retaliate. So that's part of the setup I'll talk about. But this SPI really is, it's a score of 0 to 100. You really want to see scores, hopefully, you know, that are in the 75 plus. But if somebody actually scores as a 40, you have your work cut out for you. If they're 75, there's opportunity. If they're 99, they may not be telling the truth for themselves, or there may be some real interesting dynamics going on that you'd want to understand, because 99 is really off the charts. Good. Develop a clear, objective plan to really use that natural behavior, talents, and leadership. And then these 7 core areas, which are sort of a spider graph, really cool. So you always see, when we go through that, you always see probably a little bit of a gap where they can work on improvement. And it's usually based on some of the gaps that they have in their natural behavior. Some things that they need to probably, just to be aware of. If they're not, you'll see it. Identify those gaps, where they are now and where they want to be. And then create that personal DNA leadership plan, which is a workbook in the system. In the 360, we call it the Leadership 360. It does have you use the natural behavior reports, because we assume that you've been working with them on that. You wouldn't, the first step is actually completing business DNA natural behavior, because you can't actually get into the 360 until they've completed it. So that's the first step. And then you schedule the Leadership 360. We know our friend Chris Coddington, probably not a big surprise. We know that well. Giving feedback on a 360. Constructive feedback always stings. So I had one of the first assignments I had when I came here to DNA Behavior, because he was very aware of it, was with Tyler's company CEO. He wanted to go through a 360 with his team. And I was pretty excited, because I think 360s are pretty awesome. And so he scheduled the meeting for the follow-up, so I was going to be there with Steve, and he invited his whole leadership team to be in that meeting. And I can remember telling Hugh, this is not a good idea. I just do not believe this is the right thing to do. And Hugh agreed with me. He's like, maybe you can try to talk him out of that. And I did. And he's like, I want everybody there. But he had not seen this report. So I was, I could actually say I was a little bit nervous going into that, because you just never know. If there was something in there that would have surprised him, or that he would have retaliated, there's just a lot of things that you can go through. And this was an engager CEO, so I was really a little nervous about doing that, but it actually did turn out to be a very positive experience. But that is sort of the rare exception. I would say this is a one-on-one feedback session when somebody completes it, because that feedback can be really sting. Some of the comments in there can be taken out of context. So your job as a coach is to help them really understand how that can be used constructively. Now, we do have an option in our system. If you see something that somebody's really awful, and I really take this as more of just a cautious approach, you can modify a comment, but I think the integrity of it, you really just want to be careful. But it does allow the consultant or the coach to go in and modify a question, a comment, as long as it's, the intent's still there. You really want to move If there is some resistance to it, to more about acceptance. Exposes where maybe we think we are, maybe we're really not there. Gaps of self to what people perceive we are. And this comment here, feedback allows people to fine-tune behaviors. If you've got the right team that you're working with, there really shouldn't be a lot of surprises. And it's a tune-up.